Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are undertaking a really deep and frankly quite difficult exploration into the source material concerning Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer,
Hmm.
known around the world, of course, as the Milwaukee Cannibal.
Yeah.
We're going to try and chart the progression of this pathology that spanned 13 years, from 1978 right up to 1991.
And claimed the lives of 17 men and boys. It's a very dark catalog of events we're looking at.
It really is.
But our mission here, I think, is clear. We need to synthesize the chronological facts, the timelines, and the psychological insights from the sources
Right.
to try and understand not just what happened, but maybe get closer to the internal logic driving his actions. And crucially, where the system, where intervention failed.
Yeah, those missed opportunities are key. And when you look at the specific nature of these crimes, I mean, they really go beyond typical predatory behavior, don't they?
Absolutely. The sources make it very clear,
Right.
especially the later murders. They were defined by this calculated pathology. You see necrophilia, cannibalism, and this almost scientific obsession with permanently preserving body parts.
Particularly the skeletons.
Exactly, the skeletons. And what's immediately central, I think, to understanding Dahmer's case is this profound paradox that came out during his trial.
The sanity question.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Clinically, you had multiple experts diagnosing him with severe mental illnesses, borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, even a psychotic disorder, a whole list.
Serious diagnoses.
Very serious. Yet despite this extensive catalog of, dysfunction, the jury ultimately found him legally sane in 1992.
Right.
And that contrasts the clear psychological brokenness versus the legal finding of criminal responsibility.
Yeah.
That's the core analytical thread we really have to keep coming back to,
Okay, so let's unpack this right from the beginning then. Jeffrey Dahmer, born in 1960, the sources paint a picture of a pretty volatile, maybe even chaotic early environment, driven by intense parental instability.
That's right. His father, Lionel, was a research chemist. His mother, Joyce, taught teletype machine operation. But the source material gets complicated right away, even regarding his infancy.
How so?
Well, you have these conflicting accounts. Some suggest he was really deprived of maternal affection, attention, but others claim he was actually doted upon.
Huh. How do you reconcile two completely opposite accounts like that? Does that contradiction itself maybe tell us something important about the family dynamics or maybe how they remembered things later?
I think it signals instability, definitely. High tension.
Yeah.
Which Donner himself actually confirmed later. He remembered growing up amid constant bitter fighting between his parents.
Okay.
His mother, Joyce, struggled badly with hypochondria, depression. It even culminated in a suicide attempt involving a sedative, Equinil.
Wow.
But Dahmer later recalled feeling from a really young age profoundly unsure of the solidity of the family. That lack of a firm foundation, that's critical context.
And the sources point to a specific physical event, a surgery that seemed to coincide with a major behavioral shift.
Yeah, it was quite a sharp pivot. He was apparently an energetic and happy child up until he had double hernia surgery shortly before he turned 4.
Okay.
After that procedure, the descriptions change. He became notably subdued, quieter. And this quietness happened around the same time. His father was spending long hours away studying, and his mother was spending more and more time isolated in bed. So he essentially retreated inward, losing that early energy.
And this is when the sort of macabre curiosity started, almost right after that, beginning with his father finding some old animal bones.
The sources tracked this fascination with death right back to age 4, incredibly. His father was working under their house, found some animal bones. Dahmer, apparently fascinated by the rattling noise they made, was oddly thrilled by these remains. He called them his fiddlesticks.
Fiddlesticks.
Yeah. So this early exposure, it seems to have established some kind of connection for him between bones, discovery, and maybe a kind of excitement.
And that interest just grew, didn't it? Especially when the family moved to Bath Township, Ohio. That gave him, 1.5 acres of woodland to explore?
Exactly. And the location offered immediate access for his developing, pathology. He started small, collecting large insects, things like that. But he quickly moves on to skeletons of small animals, chipmunks, squirrels.
Okay.
He stored them in a sort of makeshift hut he built.
Yeah.
Sometimes preserving remains in jars of formaldehyde.
Formaldehyde, wow.
Yeah. But the real escalation, the sort of crucial moment of instruction, seems to have happened when he was about 10.
Ah, that's when he asked his father about bleach. what it would do to a chicken bone.
Precisely. And this, looking back, is just a truly tragic miscalculation on Lionel Dahmer's part.
Yeah.
He saw this curiosity, maybe thought it was a potential sign of future interest in science.
Mhm.
So Lionel took the opportunity to actually teach Jeffrey how to safely bleach, clean, and preserve animal bones.
Oh.
Instead of maybe curbing the obsession, Lionel, completely unwittingly, gave him the technical manual for the horrific cleanups and preservation rituals that would define his adult crimes.
And he didn't just stick to chicken bones, did he? He immediately applied this to roadkill.
He did, straight away. Started collecting roadkill, dissecting the animals, and using those preservation techniques his father had shown him.
Right.
He'd dissect them, sometimes placing the skulls on top of makeshift crosses before burying the rest. It moved pretty quickly from maybe a detached scientific curiosity to something much more aggressive, darker. You really see that in the 1975 anecdote about the dog carcass.
Yeah, that story is shocking. He wasn't just dissecting anymore. He was putting it on display.
Right. At 15, he decapitated a dog carcass he found, nailed the body to a tree, and then impaled the skull on a stick, supposedly as a prank for a friend to find. Yeah. But it shows this early establishment of ritual and display. This desire not just to engage with death privately, but to use the remains as some kind of statement, maybe an object of power, even if just for himself and this one friend.
So as he moves into high school, these morbid interests start to intertwine with his emerging sexual fantasies.
The sources note he realized he was gay, but given the times, and his own emotional isolation, he kept it completely secret. And his fantasies evolved quickly, from just simple attraction to this intense focus on complete dominance. He fixated on dominating a completely submissive male partner, paying particular attention to chests and torsos.
Okay.
The dissection fantasy and sexual fantasy basically merged into one single, very dark drive.
And this internal chaos, it manifested outwardly too, didn't it? Through heavy drinking. He called alcohol his medicine.
Alcohol was definitely his primary coping mechanism. He was known as an outcast at school, but also as the class drunk, hiding liquor, drinking during the day.
Right.
Interestingly, despite earning just average grades, school staff noted he was highly intelligent. The social masks he wore were kind of famous. These pranks involving bleeding like a sheep or simulating seizures, they actually became known as doing a Dahmer.
Going a Dahmer, wow.
Yeah, these were maybe attempts to get noticed, even if it was negative attention, while still maintaining this deep emotional distance.
And the first known attempt to actually act on these domination fantasies happened when he was about 16.
It was a failed attempt, but it's very illuminating. He hit himself in some bushes with a baseball bat. He was waiting to knock out an attractive male jogger he'd seen, render him unconscious so he could, make sexual use of the body.
Gosh.
The jogger didn't show up that day. But it illustrates that even 2 years before the first actual murder, the basic method was already there. Capture, subdue, use the body as a silent object.
And all this instability, this internal turmoil, it just culminated in the summer of 1978. 3 weeks after he graduated high school, his parents finally finalized their really bitter divorce, and they left him alone in the family home in Ohio.
Yeah, that lack of parental supervision, combined with what must have been an extreme emotional void,
Yeah.
it just created the perfect catalyst, it seems. And that's when he picked up his first victim, Stephen Hicks.
Fix was only 18, hitchhiking to a rock concert. Dahmer picked him up, promised him a few beers.
Dahmer admitted later that just the sight of Hicks, who was bare-chested apparently, stirred his sexual feelings immediately. They spent hours together listening to music, talking.
Okay.
But when Hicks started talking about girls, Dahmer realized, he wasn't interested in him that way, that he'd be rejected. The moment Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer just couldn't allow it. That need to maintain control, possession over the desired object, it just trumped everything else.
The killing itself was sudden, but the actions immediately afterward. They confirmed the pathology we've been tracking since he was a kid, didn't they?
Completely. He bludgeoned Hicks twice from behind with a 10-pound dumbbell, then strangled him with the dumbbell bar itself.
Oh, God.
Then he committed sexual acts with the corpse.
Yeah.
Stripped the body, masturbated over it, exploring the chest and torso, those exact fixation points from his adolescent fantasies. Then he dragged the body down to the basement, indicating an immediate shift into that preservation and disposal phase.
And the disposal of Stephen Hicks' body, it wasn't amateurish at all, was it? He immediately applied those techniques his father taught him, but on this gruesome human scale.
It was incredibly meticulous, methodical. which suggests a chilling level of calculated action immediately after the initial, maybe impulsive murder. Over the following weeks, he dismembered the body.
Weeks.
Yeah, he pared the flesh and the bones, used acid to dissolve the flesh, which he then flushed down the toilet.
Oh, my goodness.
The sources state he then pulverized the remaining bones with a sledgehammer before scattering them in the woods behind the house. This wasn't panic. This was forensic cleanup. It proved he understood exactly how criminal his actions were and exactly how to erase the evidence.
Okay, so moving into the next phase of his life, Dahmer tried and failed repeatedly to establish any kind of normal life in the years following that first murder, right?
The underlying pathology was just too strong, it seems. And the alcohol dependency was completely crippling.
Yeah.
He enrolled at Ohio State University, apparently hoping for a business degree, but he's essentially quit studying almost immediately. Attended only a few classes, failed pretty much everything.
Wow.
He ended his first term with a shocking .45 GPA, dropped out entirely due to alcohol abuse.
So his father then convinced him to enlist in the Army. As a medical specialist, in 1979, I mean, a combat medic position seems wildly unsuited for someone with his background.
You'd think, wouldn't you? You might imagine that exposure to the medical field could offer some kind of professional redirection, maybe. But his constant intoxication just undermined any attempt at stability.
Right.
He served briefly in West Germany. Apparently, he was average initially, but his performance quickly deteriorated because he was perpetually drunk on duty. Eventually, he was deemed unsuitable for military service and received an honorable discharge in 1981. It's this continuing pattern. High intelligence, completely thwarted by crippling dependency.
And this ongoing instability, it led to his father and stepmother moving him to West Allis, Wisconsin. They were hoping the influence of his paternal grandmother, Catherine Dahmer, might finally stabilize him.
Catherine was perhaps the only person Dahmer felt any real affection for, according to the sources. They hoped her stricter, but still caring structure might help him. And initially, it seemed maybe promising. Well, he held a job as a phlebotomist for about 10 months, even attended church with her sometimes. But then came 2 years of unemployment, and the dark fantasy life he'd maybe suppressed started to resurface.
And this is where we see that transition from purely internal fantasy back to needing external objects again, specifically the mannequin.
Yeah, the sources really highlight his need for a permanent, silent object of desire. He stole a male mannequin from a department store.
Stole it.
Yeah, used it for sexual stimulation until his grandmother eventually discovered it hidden in a closet and made him get rid of it.
Okay.
That mannequin was essentially a substitute for the controlled victim he craved. A really clear warning sign that the underlying pathology hadn't gone away. It had just been temporarily managed, maybe.
So once the mannequin was gone, he shifted tactics again. He transitioned to using sedatives to achieve the same result, making human partners into objects.
Right. He started frequenting Milwaukee's gay bars and bathhouses more. His primary frustration, according to his own accounts, was the movement and, well, the personhood of his partners. He needed them to be completely static, completely under his control. So, starting around 1986, he began administering these high-powered sedatives, trazolone, clomazepam, Alcium, basically. He got them by lying to doctors, claiming he needed sleeping pills to adjust to a fictitious night shift schedule.
Wow, calculated.
Very. By lacing drinks with these sedatives, he could ensure his partners were unconscious and essentially viewed as mere objects of pleasure, as he put it, rather than individuals.
And this practice led directly to his first murder in Wisconsin, didn't it? Stephen Tuomi, November 1987, at the Ambassador Hotel. But Dahmer claimed he blacked out during the actual killing.
Dahmer's account of this one is particularly chilling. He claimed he literally woke up the next morning to find Tuomi battered to death beneath him. His chest was crushed in and black and blue, he said. And he claimed to have no memory of delivering the killing blow.
Do we believe that? The blackout?
Well, whether it was true amnesia or some kind of defensive mechanism, maybe psychological denial, the result was the same. He immediately went into action, transported the body in a large suitcase back to his grandmother's house.
And this marked a pivotal moment, right, where his cleanup and retention efforts became much more ambitious.
Yes. This was the first really extensive dismemberment he performed in Wisconsin, and he did it at his grandmother's house, in the basement, presumably.
Oh, gosh.
He attempted to preserve the head. He boiled the flesh off the skull using this highly toxic mix of Soilax, which is an industrial strength detergent, used for cleaning concrete and bleach.
Or like some bleach.
Yeah. It really highlights his comfort level with using these harsh industrial chemicals to erase human remains. The attempt actually failed, though. The skull became too brittle for display, so he had to pulverize it.
And incredibly, he used his grandmother's house for 2 more victims after Tuomi, James Doc Stater and Richard Guerrero, before the foul smells and his drinking finally forced him out.
That's right. His grandmother eventually gave him an ultimatum in September 1988. She just couldn't handle the smell coming from the basement and the garage and his constant heavy drinking.
Understandable.
So he moved into his own small apartment. But tragically, just 2 days after moving out, he was arrested for sexually assaulting a 13-year-old Laotian boy.
This seems like it should have been the major intervention point. The system had him. He was evaluated, diagnosed with serious issues, but ultimately he was paroled relatively quickly.
It's a huge failure point in the timeline. The psychological evaluations noted deep alienation, impulsivity, a schizoid personality profile.
Yeah.
Serious red flags.
Yeah.
Despite pleading guilty but insane initially, he later changed his plea. He was sentenced to 5 years probation and 1 year in the House of Correction in 1989 for second-degree sexual assault and enticing a child. Critically, he served only about 10 months and was paroled early.
And he was required to register as a sex offender.
Yes, he was. Which makes later events even more frustrating. This was a massive missed opportunity to potentially confine him long-term based on clearly demonstrated pathology and danger.
And the tragic irony, the absolute horror, is that between his conviction for that assault and the actual sentencing, he murdered again. Anthony Sears.
Anthony Sears, a 24-year-old aspiring model, was murdered in March 1989. And this was the first victim whose body parts, specifically the head and genitals, Dahmer successfully managed to retain permanently.
How did he preserve them?
He preserved them in acetone, kept them in a locked wooden box, which he then stored in his work locker at the chocolate factory. The need for physical possession for a permanent trophy had reached this new, horrifying threshold.
The secrecy around that box, it just speaks volumes about his cunning, doesn't
It
it?
really does. There's an anecdote where his father, Lionel, actually noticed the lockbox at one point and, concerned, asked Jeffrey what was inside.
What did Dahmer say?
He reacted really defensively, angrily, claimed it just contained pornography. Lionel, maybe expecting what he saw as his adult son's privacy, backed off, didn't push it.
Wow.
That simple act of backing off allowed the horror to remain concealed. It just highlights the level of calculated secrecy Dahmer was capable of.
And this calculated secrecy, it allowed him to eventually move into the Oxford Apartments, apartment 213, in May 1990, which became the setting for the final, darkest phase of his crimes.
Right. He chose 924 North 25th Street, partly because it was cheap, but also because it was in a high-crime area. He figured unusual activity might be less conspicuous there.
Smart, in a twisted way.
And he brought Anthony Sears' preserved remains with him to the new apartment. This move marked a dramatic, terrifying escalation. 12 of his 17 known victims were killed in that single apartment over just a 14-month period.
Raymond Smith was the first victim at the new address, and this is where Dahmer introduced another element to his ritual, the Polaroid photography.
Yes, he began taking pictures of the victims' bodies, often posed in various suggestive post-mortem positions.
Why? Did he say why?
He explained it later as my way of remembering their appearance, their physical beauty. It wasn't just about possessing the physical body anymore, but also possessing the memory and the image of the body permanently. Raymond Smith's skull was the first one he successfully spray-painted, likely silver or gray, and retained for his growing collection.
His obsession with retention, with keeping parts, led to some pretty spectacular, though horrifying failures, didn't it? It really demonstrates his sort of DIY approach to forensic preservation.
Absolutely. It's bizarre. After killing Edward Smith, he tried to freeze the entire skeleton for months. He hoped this would remove moisture and allow for permanent preservation.
Did it work?
No. When freezing proved ineffective, he actually tried to dry the skull in the oven.
In the oven?
Yes, and it exploded. He later confessed to feeling rotten about this failure because he couldn't retain any parts of Smith's body. It shows this profound disappointment he felt when the ritual failed to yield the desired object, the trophy.
And then came the shift into full cannibalism, starting with Ernest Miller, the dance student he killed in September 1990.
Miller was killed by slashing his carotid artery. After that, Dahmer moved into actual consumption. He wrapped portions of Miller's heart, liver, biceps, and thigh muscle in plastic and put them in his freezer.
And his rationale for this?
Initially, he described it as just starting out of curiosity. But it quickly evolved into this chilling belief that consumption made the victims even more a permanent part of me, a way to fully internalize them.
And the detail regarding the thigh muscle, it just illustrates the utterly grotesque reality of what he was doing.
It does. The sources note he found the thigh muscle so tough he could hardly chew it, which forced him to start using commercial meat tenderizer.
Oh my God.
That level of, culinary preparation,
Yeah.
it just underscores the complete and utter dehumanization of the victim. After this, he was finally successful in boiling the remaining flesh off Miller's skeleton using Soilax. He retained that first full skeleton for what was becoming his grand project.
That grand project, this ultimate desire for a permanent, silent, completely submissive partner, it led him to that horrifying drilling experiment in April 1991 with Errol Lindsay, right?
This really represents the absolute apex of his delusional control fantasies. His goal here was incredibly specific and terrifying. He didn't want to kill the victim instantly anymore.
What did he want?
He wanted to drill a small hole into the skull and inject hydrochloric acid directly into the frontal lobe. His aim was to induce a permanent, unresistant, submissive state. He was attempting literal surgical zombification, creating a living doll.
But the procedure, it proved instantly fatal, didn't it? Or almost instantly fatal in Lindsay's case.
The instance with Errol Lindsay is one of the most haunting details in the entire source material, I think. Lindsay actually woke up after the drilling procedure.
He woke up?
Yes. Disoriented, he reportedly asked Dahmer, "I have a headache. What time is it?"
Oh, God.
Dahmer immediately had to drug him again and strangle him. It proved his method was a fatal failure, but not before providing this moment of terrible, lucid horror for the victim.
Just unbelievable. However, maybe the most egregious failure of intervention of the system followed just a month later. The Conorak synthesomphone disaster.
This entire event,
Yeah.
it's just a textbook example of systemic negligence, arguably layered with racial bias. Conorak synthesomphone was only 14 years old.
14.
He was lured back to Dahmer's apartment,
Oh, Brent.
drugged, and then Dahmer performed the drilling procedure on him. And crucially, Conorak was the younger brother of the boy Dahmer had sexually assaulted back in 1988.
The same family.
Yes. A fact the police would have immediately discovered if they had simply run a basic background check on Dahmer, who, remember, was a registered sex offender living at that address.
Unbelievable negligence. Conorak somehow managed to stumble outside the apartment building. Naked, disoriented, bleeding.
Yes. 3 concerned local women, all black, found him in the street and called 911 immediately.
Oh, okay.
Officers John Balcerzak and Joseph Gabrish responded. Dahmer quickly intercepted them, lied smoothly, claimed Conorak was his 19-year-old intoxicated boyfriend, gave a fake name, John Henmong, and said they just had a lover's quarrel.
And the women who found him, they tried to intervene.
They tried desperately. They pointed out that Conorak was clearly injured, bleeding from the rectum, not just drunk. They pleaded with the officers.
But the officers, they were convinced by Dahmer, by his composure, and he showed them some photos.
He showed them 2 semi-nude Polaroids he had, supposedly proving they were lovers. The officers bought his story. They dismissed the women, with one officer harshly telling them to butt out.
Oh, come on.
Officer Gabrish even noted later there was a strange scent reminiscent of excrement coming from the apartment, which was, of course, the decomposing body of another victim, Tony Hughes, lying in the bedroom.
Did they even look inside?
According to reports, they merely peeked their heads around the bedroom door. Didn't see anything amiss, apparently. They then helped Dahmer escort the clearly incapacitated boy back inside the apartment, telling Dahmer to take good care of him.
They left him there with Dahmer.
They left him there.
Yeah.
And the subsequent radio traffic just confirms the total callousness and failure to follow basic procedure.
What did it say?
The patrol unit radio dispatch, kind of joking about the incident, said the intoxicated Asian naked male was returned to his sober boyfriend. And there was a quip about one partner needing to get deloused at the station.
That's sickening.
The failure was absolute. Dahmer immediately injected Conorak with more acid as soon as the police left, which was fatal. He dismembered both Conorak and Tony Hughes the very next day. This case, understandably, later triggered a huge public outcry about racial profiling and police incompetence in Milwaukee.
After this disaster, Dahmer entered his final, almost frenzied spree, didn't he? In July 1991, killing 4 more men in rapid succession, including Oliver Lacey and Joseph Breithoft. It seems like he was rushing towards some kind of culmination, the construction of his final altar.
He described his state of mind at the time as being driven by an incessant and never-ending desire to be with someone at whatever cost. The final murders, it seems, became the necessary sacrifices for his ultimate vision. He was actively constructing a private physical monument to his own power.
Can you describe this grand vision? The altar. What did the sources say it looked like?
In his apartment, he was setting up this black table. He adorned it with incense, a large blue globe lamp he had. And on this table, he was arranging an altar consisting of 7 skulls and 2 complete skeletons, those of Ernest Miller and Oliver Lacey.
7 skulls and 2 skeletons?
Yes. He confessed that this entire structure was dedicated to myself. He intended it as a place for meditation, a source from which he believed he could draw a sense of power and self-affirmation.
Wow.
He told investigators chillingly, if this arrest had happened 6 months later, that's what they would have found, fully assembled.
So if the earlier killings were maybe attempts at possession, finding the right method, the final few were essentially just ritualistic steps to build the self-affirming monument. Is that the idea?
That seems to be the core analytical point emerging from the sources, yes.
Yeah.
The murder, the mutilation, the cannibalism.
Yeah.
Those were the means, the construction phase, if you will, not the ultimate end goal.
Right.
The final goal was this sanctuary, this physical manifestation of his dominance, his power, and his ability to transform human life into permanent silent objects that affirmed his own sense of self.
The entire House of Horrors finally came crashing down on July 10th, 1991, and it was thanks to the heroic actions of one man, Tracy Edwards.
Edwards, who was 32 at the time, accepted Dahmer's offer of $100 to pose for nude pictures. But as soon as he entered apartment 213, Edwards immediately noticed the overwhelming foul odor. He saw the 57-gallon blue drum, bottles of hydrochloric acid.
Red flags everywhere.
Big time. Dahmer then placed one handcuff on Edwards' wrist, started rocking back and forth, chanting something unintelligible. Then he brandished a large butcher knife and told Edwards he intended to eat his heart.
That final explicit threat, that must have been what provided the terror, the adrenaline for Edwards to act.
It seems so. Edwards displayed incredible presence of mind. He managed to trick Dahmer, saying he needed to use the bathroom again. When Dahmer momentarily looked away or was slightly off balance, Edwards seized the chance. He punched Dahmer hard.
Good for him.
And managed to get out the unlocked front door, still wearing the handcuff, and flag down the first police car he saw.
Officers Ruth and Miller responded. When they went back to the apartment with Edwards, Mueller found the crucial piece of evidence, didn't he? In the bedside dresser drawer.
That's right. Mueller was looking for the key to the handcuff Edwards was still wearing. When he opened the nightstand drawer, he found scores of explicit, graphic Polaroid photographs detailing the dismemberment process, bodies posed, all taken right there in that bedroom.
Oh, man.
He immediately showed them to his partner, Robert Ruth, uttering that now infamous line, "These are for real."
These are for real?
Yeah. When Dahmer realized the photographs had been discovered, he apparently fought the officers, lunged at them, but was quickly overpowered and arrested.
And the rest of the crime scene discovery just confirmed everything in the photos and everything we've been discussing.
The chief medical examiner, Jeffrey Jensen, later stated this scene was more like dismantling someone's museum than an actual crime scene. The inventory was just horrifying. 4 severed heads found in the kitchen, 7 bleached skulls in the bedroom closet and on shelves, 2 human hearts in the freezer, preserved penises in the fridge, and 3 torsos actively dissolving in that 57-gallon drum of acid in the corner of the bedroom. It was essentially a factory of death and preservation.
Unbelievable. Dahmer confessed almost immediately, didn't he? Over 60 hours of interviews, waived his right to a lawyer.
He confessed readily, said he wanted to put an end to it. He detailed everything, the necrophilia involving viscera sometimes, his explicit reasons for cannibalism again, to make the victims even more a permanent part of me. He seemed almost relieved, in a strange way, that it was over.
He was indicted on 15 counts of murder in Wisconsin, and eventually a 16th count for Stephen Hicks back in Ohio, which led to the pivotal legal event, the 1992 Sanity trial, which centered squarely on that paradox we discussed earlier. Was he mentally ill beyond control, or was he calculating and sane?
Exactly. Wisconsin law required a separate trial phase to determine sanity, since Dahmer pled guilty but insane. The defense centered its entire argument on the concept of irresistible impulse, stemming from profound, clinically diagnosed mental illness.
Right.
They argued that the sheer overwhelming nature of his necrophilic drives, his paraphilias, and his compulsions meant he simply could not conform his conduct to the requirements of the law. Defense expert Dr. Fred Berlin specifically testified that Dahmer was legally insane due to the extremity of his paraphilia, that he couldn't control the impulse to possess and kill.
And they leaned heavily on those existing diagnoses. Borderline, schizotypal.
Absolutely. Borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, conditions often involving intense emotional instability, distorted thought patterns, difficulty with reality testing. They painted him as a victim of his own sickness, a sickness he discovered, not chose, as one defense attorney put it.
But the prosecution, they focused entirely on the cunning, the meticulous nature of the cleanups, the secrecy.
Prosecutor Michael McCann hammered that point home. Described Dahmer as manipulative, calculating, fully capable of controlling his actions when he needed to. Their key witness, forensic psychiatrist Dr. Park Dietz, presented what turned out to be the most compelling counter-argument, especially regarding the alcohol use.
What was Dietz's argument about the alcohol?
Dietz argued that if Dahmer had a true compulsion, meaning an overwhelming, irresistible urge he couldn't stop to kill, he wouldn't need to get drunk first to follow through.
Ah, okay, so the drinking wasn't fueling the compulsion.
Exactly. Dietz successfully argued that Dahmer drank to overcome his inhibition against killing, the part of him that knew it was wrong. He knew the difference between right and wrong. Look at the evidence. He meticulously cleaned the crime scenes, dissolved flesh, pulverized bones, went to extraordinary lengths to ensure he was alone with his victims, that there were no witnesses. All of these actions demonstrated a clear understanding of criminality and a massive, calculated effort to avoid consequences.
And Dietz also brought up Dahmer's interest in certain movie villains.
Yes. Dietz noted that Dahmer strongly identified with powerful evil figures in films like The Exorcist III, specifically The Gemini Killer and Emperor Palpatine from Return of the Jedi. Dietz suggested this showed a conscious identification with and pursuit of power and control, rather than Dahmer just being a passive victim of random, uncontrollable impulses.
And the jury, they ultimately agreed with the prosecution, didn't they? Ruled him legally sane.
They did, on all 15 Wisconsin counts. Though it wasn't unanimous initially, 2 jurors dissented on every count during deliberations before eventually agreeing.
Right.
He was subsequently sentenced to 16 consecutive life terms, totaling 941 years imprisonment. At his sentencing, Dahmer actually addressed the court. He stated he wished for his own death, confirmed his murders weren't motivated by hatred, and said he believed he deserved the maximum sentence.
So Dahmer was sent to Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. Initially, he was kept in solitary confinement, mainly for his own safety, right? But he requested a transfer after about a year.
That's right. He asked to be moved into a general population work detail.
Oh.
He was assigned work cleaning the prison toilet block and the gym area.
Okay.
And during this period in prison, he seemed to display a pretty marked psychological shift. He became a born-again Christian, was actually baptized in the prison whirlpool in May of 1994.
Baptized in the prison whirlpool. Wow. He seemed to have sort of accepted his fate, maybe even questioning his own right to continue living.
He often discussed death with the minister who baptized him, Roy Ratcliffe, and also with his mother, Joyce, who had reconnected with him by phone. Apparently, whenever Joyce expressed concern for his safety in prison, he'd dismiss it. Say things like, "It doesn't matter, Mom. I don't care if something happens to me." He stated in one prison interview that if a person doesn't feel accountable to God, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior? It seems he found some kind of peace, perhaps, in accountability, even if that ultimately meant accepting death.
And death came, brutally and abruptly, November 28, 1994.
He was on that work detail in the prison gym showers area with 2 other inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. They were left unsupervised by guards for about 20 minutes.
Unsupervised.
Yes. Christopher Scarver, who himself suffered from schizophrenia and apparently believed he was receiving divine commands, attacked both Dahmer and Anderson. He bludgeoned them with a 20-inch metal bar he'd taken from the prison weight room, inflicted extreme head trauma on both.
Dahmer was pronounced dead just an hour later, wasn't he? And
Scarver immediately returned to his cell after the attack. Calmly told a guard, "God told me to do it."
God told me to do it.
Scarver also later claimed that Dahmer's final words, as Scarver approached him, were, "I don't care if I live or die, go ahead and kill me," which suggests a kind of final, complete resignation, if true.
The reaction from the victims' families was understandably mixed, I suppose. Some celebrated the sort of vigilante justice, others maybe didn't. His mother's reaction was quite bitter, wasn't it?
Yes. Joyce Flint's reported reaction was simply, "Now is everybody happy?"
A very bitter response to the news. The fallout from his crimes, beyond the immediate horror, really highlighted some major societal issues, didn't it? specifically the racial tensions, particularly brought to the forefront by the police handling of the Conorak synthesome case.
Absolutely. The vast majority of his victims, 14 out of 17, were ethnic minorities, with 9 being black men or boys. The catastrophic failure of the Milwaukee police to properly investigate when they had Conorak right there. It highlighted and severely exacerbated the already significant racial tension in Milwaukee, which was known as one of the most segregated cities in the U.S. at the time.
And officers Belshazak and Gabrish, what happened to them?
They were initially fired after a public outcry and an internal investigation. However, they later appealed and were actually reinstated, with back pay, though neither returned to street patrol immediately.
Wow. And the physical evidence of his crimes, the apartment building itself.
It was systematically erased. The Oxford Apartments building at 924 North 25th Street was demolished just over a year after his arrest in November 1992. The site remains a vacant lot to this day.
And his belongings, the tools, the freezer, all that stuff.
There was a concerted effort by a local civic group, Milwaukee Civic Pride. They raised funds, including a significant $100,000 gift from a philanthropist named Joseph Zilber, specifically to purchase all of Dahmer's possessions that had been seized as evidence.
Why? To preserve them.
No, exactly the opposite. They bought everything, the tools, the freezer, the infamous blue drum, even the photographs specifically to ensure they were all destroyed and buried in an undisclosed landfill. The goal was to prevent any of it from ever entering the macabre murderabilia collector's market.
That seems like a responsible move. And even after his death, there was that final kind of gruesome footnote, the dispute between his parents over his brain.
Yeah, it's quite something. Dahmer's body was cremated according to his will, but his brain was preserved for a time because his parents disagreed vehemently about what should happen to it.
What was the disagreement?
His mother, Joyce, wanted the brain studied. She hoped scientists could find some neurological or biological explanation, some abnormality that might explain his horrific pathology.
And his father?
His father, Lionel, argued strongly against it. He just wanted the entire chapter closed. To cremate the brain, along with the rest of the remains, put an end to it all. After about a year-long court battle, the court ultimately sided with Lionel's wishes. Dahmer's brain was finally cremated in December 1995.
So let's bring it back then to that original fundamental question that really defined his trial. If the prosecution was correct, if Dahmer was fundamentally driven by calculating control, how does that square with his final, elaborate project, that self-dedicated altar he was building, intended as a source of power and a place for meditation?
Well, the initial impulse to kill might well have been driven by desire, by paraphilia, as the defense argued. But the control argument, I think, is solidified by everything that happened after the death, the post-mortem ritual.
Right.
The ultimate goal wasn't just fleeting sexual gratification with a corpse. That seemed almost secondary sometimes. The real goal was the permanence of possession. And achieving that required methodical cleanup, chemical preservation, meticulous arrangement, and eventually display. We saw him start trying this right from the pulverized bones of Hicks, even the preserved dog skull he called a prank.
So the elaborate structure of the altar, the 7 skulls, the 2 complete skeletons, the incense, dedicating it to myself, it suggests that the entire sequence, the murder, the mutilation, the cannibalism, it was all merely the necessary ritualistic steps required to construct that ultimate self-affirming structure.
And it really looks that way when you synthesize the sources. It wasn't just control over the victim in the moment of death, it was achieving permanent control over their very essence, transforming their physical remains into components of a personal monument to his own twisted pathology.
Yeah.
If he viewed himself, as Park Died suggested, as this powerful, almost Sith Lord-like villain, then the altar was his cathedral, his shrine. The chilling implication, then, is that the horror wasn't just the act of murder itself, but the meticulous, calculated, almost industrial construction phase that followed. All required, in his mind, to affirm his monstrous identity.
A truly profound and deeply disturbing realization that the preservation, the construction was just as important, maybe more important to him in the end, than the act of killing itself. Thank you for guiding us through this incredibly detailed and, frankly, very difficult source material today.
Thank you. It's, a necessary deep dive, I think, into the anatomy of a truly extreme obsession.